Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Thank you so much for listening and tuning in on today's show. I have a very special guest for today's show. My guest today is Miss Janay Johnson. She's a licensed marriage and family therapist based in Philadelphia. She's written a book called Dear Teen Self, and she specializes in working with teens. She loves her teenagers, especially girls. That's her special niche. And Janay, I have a very special show planned for you today with Janay. We had a very interesting talk on some things that we need to be mindful of when we are talking to and, assisting our teenage girls, and some of the language around that it's really hindering our girls and putting them in a box and stigmatizing them, especially in Black families. So that's what she and I are going to talk about today, and I think you'll really enjoy this show. So without further ado, here's Janay. Hi, Janay. Welcome to the show.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
I'm excited too. This has been a meeting that's long overdue. And for folks that are not familiar with you, can you tell us about you and what you do and what drives the passion behind your work?
Oh, absolutely. So my name is Janay Johnson. I am a teen therapist and author. I work with teens specifically. They are one of my favorite, they are my favorite population. I really just enjoy their zest for life, their creativity, their passion, their spontaneity. And I was led to this work primarily from my own experience as a teenager, kind of being super vivacious, super curious about the world, and really not being embraced well by adults because of that. So I kind of went through a lot of my own struggles with navigating teendom and trying to find a way to fit in. And I said, I feel like it didn't have to be that hard for me. And so I just wanted to fill in the gap that was there when I was growing up as a teenager. So here I am today.
That's awesome. And when you say that your curiosity, your vivaciousness, and all of those things weren't embraced by adults as a teenager, could you expand on that a little bit more and talk about what that was that you felt like wasn't embraced?
Right. So one of the biggest things I can really recall and remember, and I have these conversations a lot about girls and their body, is once my body really started to develop, it was almost as if my childhood disappeared. And people didn't necessarily see me as a teen, which is still a child, right? They didn't see me that way anymore. So I felt, even at 13, it's actually a little bit younger when my body really started to develop, that there was just this shift of how people saw me and treated me. And so I no longer had the, space or ability to ask a lot of questions without being labeled, or do certain things without labels, such as, wearing certain clothes or asking certain questions. Everything became, you're grown, you're fast. And it's like, how did that happen that quickly? So that was probably one of the biggest things I've noticed is when puberty hit and my body began to develop, everyone around me no longer saw me as a child. And so the questions that I had, the places I wanted to go, the things I wanted to try, they quickly developed labels for myself. And then that became very hard to navigate through because I'm like, I don't find myself to be fast or grown or any of those things. Yet that is what everyone is saying to me or are saying to me. So yeah, like just in general, I just wasn't embraced through the teen years. So it was a very interesting thing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you touched on that because that's actually why we have you on the show. Where, of course, the show is all about hurtful and abusive and narcissistic relationships. And I think your experience is a perfect segue into what we're going to be talking about in terms of teens that are not allowed to use their voice and express themselves and really are stifled emotionally or, just stifled in every way when they grow up in abusive homes.
Yeah.
So, and I'll start with, a couple of the terminology that you hit on, because we're both African American, and I think, the majority of my listeners are African American. And so the words that you use, grown and fast, let's start there. Tell me about those words. Those words are used very frequently, and tell me how those words are used and what they mean and what they're meant to do.
Oh, okay. So the word grown to me has always meant, and even when I hear it, I'm always seeing people use it in terms of this child is no longer acting like a child. They feel that this child is now acting like a grown-up, right? Mm-hmm. However, what I've noticed is it's a lot of projection. Mm-hmm. It's not really that child being a grown-up, but we in our community, unfortunately, do not see agency over self as a good thing. We see it as disrespectful. If you have any other thought than what I'm telling you, then you're being disrespectful. If you comment when I'm saying something, then you're being disrespectful. So we don't really place a high value on individual thought or individual expression. And when those things occur, you're being grown. You're trying to be a grown-up because that is only reserved for grown-ups.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Children just do what we say. They don't ask questions, and that's it, which is problematic. But of course, we're just talking about what the words mean for now. And fast is the very same thing. It's assigning a sexuality or a sexual label to the girl. It's okay, I can see that your body is developing or you have these desires, but you're moving too fast through this phase. Again, because that traditionally was reserved for older people who were married. I'm not even going to say older people because I think the reality is there was a time where people were getting married at very young ages.
Yes.
And it was okay to have sex as long as you were married. So it didn't matter the age, the marriage was the piece. And so I think, again, even with the term fast, we're looking at it and saying, okay, you're growing up too fast, you're moving too fast, but what we end up doing is negating the idea that a teenager has a body that can be for pleasure, that they have sexual feelings. And then we also just kind of shame them as well about their sexuality and about their body. And honestly, we kind of force them right to it because when your teenager isn't necessarily being fast or doing anything, you are kind of putting, if they want to be a rebel, they can just go out there and decide to now do all of these things and be this person because you've spoken that over them so much. Now, in terms of what I think the goal is of these terms, I think the goal is for parents to protect their teenager from, the ills of life, if you will. Because yes, having sex comes with other consequences or other, layers of responsibility that the teen may not be ready to deal with. However, we shame them instead of educating them. We try to chastise them instead of just having a very open dialogue. So I feel the terms are, for the most part, meant to deter them, and it's a fear tactic that we have utilized in our community for a very long time.
Yeah.
Fear and shame is how we think we can get people to shape up. And I think that's what they're meant to do. They're meant to be fear tactics, but ultimately to not cause their team any harm. But they don't realize that the method that they're using is already causing harm.
It is, and I have to agree with you. And I want to back up a minute. And it's so interesting that we're starting off with these two words, but I think they're very common, and I don't think people understand the impact. But Janay, as I'm listening to you talk and talk about those specific words, in my recollection and growing up, I only heard the terminology that you mentioned reference towards young girls. I never really heard anybody say that about a young boy.
Right, me neither.
So what do you think that's about? That, there's more of this trying to shame a young girl, or to say to a young girl that sexually you can't express yourself or ask those questions, or you can't have those needs. Basically, you were to be seen and not heard.
So I think it has everything to do with how or genders are groomed. So I think the very, very sad part about it, because I feel bad for boys as well, because honestly, they're only groomed for their identity to be based around sexual encounters with women. And I think that is just heartbreaking. They probably don't recognize it, but it's terrible that the only way people see you is if you can say you've had sex with this many girls or something. Like, it's just it makes me sad. And so I think that's part of the reason. I think part of the reason is we attach a boy's defining moments and his, who he is and his identity to women, and to conquering women, and to having women, and to doing all those things. And so with that, we groom women to want to be chosen. And men do this too by saying the only way you can be chosen is if you're pure. The only way you can be chosen is if you do all of these things. And so when you have a parent now, because a lot of parents also, perpetuate this, you have a parent that loves a child or loves their girls, and they're like, well, why wouldn't I want my daughter to be chosen? I want my daughter to have a good life. And so if the only way my daughter is going to have a good life is for her to not have sex and be this good girl, cook and clean for this man, then I have to raise her for that. I have to bring her up so that she's chosen, because then that's going to look like a good reflection of me as a parent. So, yeah, it's kind of like really all twisted. And I think that even if we know better, and I fear this even for my life moving forward, because it's like, even if we know better, we still can sometimes have that feeling of, I don't want my child to go through this, so I'm just going to go ahead and subscribe to what society is saying, so that my child may not have to deal with the pain of this or deal with this.
How do you think having those messages implanted at such a young age, how does that play out as we grow up and become adults? What do you think? What do you see?
So it plays out. So even as teenagers, right? Because of course I work with lots of teens. It's playing out already, and it's playing out at very young ages. So I see now a lot of teens they have privacy issues. So one of the biggest things I see, which is abusive, and so I'm gonna share this because it's a big deal. Social media is a big thing, and a lot of teenagers are getting into relationships like they always have, right? But of course, with social media, it's a little different. So the teens nowadays and middle schoolers who shouldn't be on social media, but they are, they give each other their passwords to their phones, and they have their partner's fingerprints in the phone. And I'm like, why are you guys doing that? And it's like, oh, well, I have to just make sure that I can trust this person. And it's like, well, there's a lot of privacy being invaded here. So they don't even kind of have this concept of building a healthy relationship. It all starts with, I already don't trust this person. I need to have access to your phone, your messages, everything you're doing. You got to FaceTime me all of the time. So now we have youth who are in relationships at 12, 13, 14, who are checking DMs and checking Facebook messages and checking text messages and Instagram messages and stories because they are already engaged in a very toxic relationships because they've been taught that you can't trust people. And it's and you have girls now that are taking the idea that boys have had the ability to be sexually liberated for so many years, and they're like, well, why can't we be like that? And I don't necessarily disagree with the rhetoric. I just think that overall the youth just don't have healthy connections in general, because I think that the rhetoric that boys are taught is not good either. So I think now you have girls just kind of completely flopping to the other side, where we really need them to be is somewhere in the middle, and somewhere in the middle where they're not maybe not having sex yet, but learning about it and really understanding it and having people talk to them about it. But all of those things are gone because social media and the internet has pushed in.
Wow. So that sounds really troubling, to say the least.
Yeah.
For young people. And it sounds like it starts very early on. So what is it that you feel like are the biggest problem areas in parenting for young people? I mean, aside from just the language that you used in the beginning, which is specific to our culture, you really try to keep people in their place. And it sounds like, for me, what I'm hearing you say, even within that language, that children are being controlled at a very early age, which to some degree I think is healthy because they haven't developed a clear idea of right and wrong yet. But at the same time, it almost seems like you're saying emotionally they're being stifled.
Yes. Okay, so one of the biggest things I can say about parenting that really isn't serving our youth well now is there's a very hands-off yet critical parenting approach that's being fostered in the world right now. I see parents with, and I see very extreme parents. I will say that. I see parents that go to the extreme of letting their kids have all of the access to everything. And then the parent is also extremely critical. Or you have a parent that's completely hands off, or you have a parent that's like completely hands on. So what I'm seeing is parents that are just extremely on the end of every spectrum. There is seldom that I see parents that are in the middle, like, okay, here are boundaries, here's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to work it out. The other piece, especially with the younger children, adults have such busy lives. I think we live in a world, I've been saying this to my friends, I'm like, we have to slow down. Like, our worlds are just too fast. We're waking up early, we're working on businesses, we're doing all of this, and we're not slowing down enough. And because I think the world is moving so fast, adults really aren't spending time engaging with their child. They may be raising them, but they're not engaging with them. And the difference is, to me, raising them is just kind of like, okay, here are my set goals, rules, boundaries. This is just what we have to hit. I'm going to make sure you kind of have the basics. Yeah. Where engaging, you know what I mean? And like engaging is like actually having a dialogue with them about what really occurred in school. And not just saying the same old how was school, but asking them, like, what's your favorite subject? Or I remember when I was in the 6th grade and this was going on, and being intentional, and I tell parents this all the time, you have to be intentional with the time that you spend with your teenager, not just by happenstance. And I think that's what I see a lot less of. I do not see parents being intentional with their time to get to know their teenager. And so because that doesn't happen, the teenager will go where they need to go to get the attention. And that could look different for most teenagers. But parents are not really modeling how to have a healthy relationship with their teen because they feel they're meeting some of their basic needs and that's it. Or you have this other end of the spectrum with parents that feel, oh, well, she gets more than I got when I was growing up, so she should be grateful. And so then there's that type of parent that doesn't recognize, like, yes, we can all acknowledge that you worked really hard to be able to put your child in private school or all of these activities, but that still doesn't diminish the fact that you don't actually spend time with her, and that or him, when they don't actually know you, and you probably don't actually know them. It's almost like you push them into all of these other environments and you've stripped away the home environment. Because if you think about it, they're going to spend a lot of time out of the home, right? Which isn't a bad thing, but it definitely can be depending on your child. I also see parents, obviously, right? I'm like rambling, but this is like my topic. I love it.
This is good stuff.
Yeah, I also see parents that parent, I'm going to slow down. I see a lot of parents that parent the teen that they were. So there are a lot of parents that are parenting their teenager, but based on how they may have wanted to be parent when they were a teenager. And that is tricky water.
It is, yeah. I think I get what you're saying, is that people are parenting based upon the parenting that they wish that they had.
Yes.
So that means that that can also be very extreme.
Yes.
Yeah.
It can be very extreme. It can be really detrimental. And I'll give you a few examples of that. So you may have had a child. You may have wanted to go to a certain type of school or felt like your school wasn't good, or you wanted this or that, or wanted more structure, wanted more of a vigorous education. But you may have a teenager that has a, slower learning pace, or likes to be around, people that they can identify with. Yet you put them in a very prestigious, private school where they're like one of the only 3 Black people, and they're struggling because the environment isn't good for them. Yet the parent would have thrived in that environment, but they didn't have that opportunity. And so a lot of what I even tell parents is we have to look at what's going to be best for your teen, not what's going to be best for your reputation as a parent, and not what has been best for you when you were a teenager. We have to look at who your child is today and now in this moment. So I see a lot of different things with parents, and some of those environments and some of these things can be very toxic and abusive. And I don't think that a lot of parents really stop to see it that way. But
yeah, because I'm listening to you, and it does sound very abusive. I mean, you've essentially named psychological abuse and neglect. Those are characteristics of psychological abuse and neglect. You've named in just some of the parenting tactics there. And it also sounds like, from what you were talking about in that last segment, or even all of them really, that people are really parenting based off of their own childhood traumas.
Yes.
That's pretty deep.
Yeah, it is. And it's part of the reason why I enjoyed my training in systemic therapy, because you get to look at the system, I had the ability to like really halt the parent. There have been times where a parent began to, an example is like a parent could let a young girl have a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And then the parent begins to shame the girl for having a boyfriend. Like, you better not be doing anything. You better not do this, that, and the third. And then the girl is now confused because I was allowed to have a boyfriend, yet now that I have a boyfriend, I'm being called names and I'm being told I better not come in the house pregnant, or I better not do all of this. And so now the teen could very well start acting out because, one, they're getting mixed messages and they're getting abusive messages. And so then, you know, as a systemic therapist, I would have to then, I could then, and I actually had to do this, you know, in some way, shape, or fashion, to stop the parent, and would say to the parent, like, let's take a minute, let's take a beat. What was happening for you at this age? And then I have to take a moment to talk to them, because what could be happening is that their trauma from that age is popping up. Something happened to them sexually, whether they got pregnant or maybe had a, you know, maybe sexually assaulted. Something occurred with them at the age of 13. And so now they're triggered, and now their trauma is showing up in their parenting. And so the conversation could look very much like, you know, and I had to have a conversation with a parent like this in the past. And I said, hey, you know, you don't have to allow this to happen. If you aren't comfortable and if you want to protect your child in any way, you don't have to say yes, you know? And then I had to empower the parent to shift their narrative. Like, because what's not fair is that you give your daughter permission to have a boyfriend and then shame her. That's not fair.
No.
So you can just decide you don't think she's ready to date, or, you know, you want to have more experience, you know, whatever it is, but you can just make that decision as a parent that I think she'll respect more, because it won't be attached to all of the abusive language, because you weren't really ready for her to make that choice, or weren't ready for her to have a relationship, and you haven't dealt with your trauma, and now it's going to show up. And it was, you know, I think that's why I love my training, because it really helped me be able to see things like that and not kind of get caught up in just the abusive language of it, but to say, okay, this is happening, something else is going on. There's a fire somewhere else that hasn't been put out, because this shouldn't necessarily render this type of response. And so, yes, parents do it a lot in a lot of different ways.
So then are people afraid to parent their children? Especially when they become teenagers, you know, because I hear what you say in terms of, you know, people are busy and things like that. But we kind of, if we slow down and think about it, we make time for what we want to make time for. Do you feel like people are afraid of, or just kind of, maybe they don't know what to do when it comes to parenting?
So I think it's two things. I actually think there are parents that are afraid of it. I think that there are parents that don't know what to do. And I think that there are parents that just do not see their teenagers as children anymore.
Okay, what does that mean?
So there are some parents that, when they don't see their child as a child anymore, they feel they're done parenting. And a lot of people actually look at teenagers and say, like, I don't have to raise you. Like, now is the time for you to become an adult and you to do your own thing. And partly, I don't blame parents. So in 1941, that was the first time the word teenager was ever printed. So it really wasn't that long ago.
Yeah.
And when we think about this, and I was reading that, and I was like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense, because before, you know, children were being married at 13.
Yeah, they were.
You know, 14, 15, you know, they became adults. They started to help on the farm. They got married. And so you went from a child to an adult, although age-wise, you were still kind of young. Lots of rites of passages in different cultures, 13, 16, you know, not super like old ages. And so I think because of that difference back then, and then the way that the body develops, you know, you go from looking smaller to
Yes.
now almost being the same size
Yes.
as an adult. And so I think you have that physical piece that also can project like, oh, you're an adult now. And then you have teenagers that begin to have their own thought. They have questions where when you're 9 or you're 7, you just go with whatever your parent is saying because they know you trust that they know best and you're just going with it, where a teenager begins to have more thought and more, more ideas, more agency over self. So I think you have some parents that are just like, okay, I don't have anything else to do at this point. And that could be based on how they were raised. Someone may have been hands off with them as a teenager. And a parent may feel, I turned out okay, right? We hear that a lot even about spanking. I got spanked and I turned out okay. And I'm always like, I'm not even sure you turned out okay. Because I mean, like, let's just be real, I think that's the hard part. It's like, we just have to be honest about it.
Yeah.
Did you really turn out okay? Or do you now think that violence is okay?
Yeah.
Or, and we don't really stop to think about it that way, because what does turned out okay mean? Turned out okay could just mean you've been able to hold a job. It may not have anything to do with anything emotional or anything like that, but okay, I can have a job and so I'm fine.
Wow. And so when you have children that are coming from these backgrounds with their parents, where their parents aren't involved, or their parents are basically, parenting from childhood traumas based on the way that they felt like they should have been raised, or you have children that their parents are constantly trying to one up them and saying, well, you never had it as bad as I did, this and that and the other thing. What do these teenagers think about their parents? What are they thinking? How are they feeling about the relationship that they have with their parents when they come to see you?
So most of them, so I will say that there's a mix. I think that there are a lot of teenagers that see their parent kind of as their best friend or the only person around, because their parent may have, again, created a lifestyle for them that they did not have. And so now this child is isolated. And so now this child has no one kind of but the parent. But the child is against that because they don't want that. But the life has been set up for them to be in, environments that they're uncomfortable in. And then you have another set of children or teens that I see that love their parents but feel like their parents don't really do enough to engage with them. And they don't see how they're stifling their voice. They don't really want to hear that they're stifling their voice. And the teen has to navigate on their own, which is part of what I teach them, is how can you be emotionally responsible and navigate, your emotions in the world that you're in. Because the one thing I don't want is for a teen to act out so much that they create, trauma in their own life based on a parent not being ready to see different things. So of course I still bring in parents, but I am also working to equip the teenager to still get what they need in a positive way and help them navigate that as we work on the parent seeing what they need to change. So yeah, I see parents or see teens that feel like their parent is their best friend, but they don't want the parent to necessarily be their best friend. Then I see the teen that is, like, my parent doesn't listen, she's mean, or they don't love me, they don't care about me. Even with having like a lot of bells and whistles. And that's why I think that the engaging and the emotional piece is what is needed most. And then I have a whole nother sector of teens where they could have blended families. And parents do not do a good job at blending families overall, of course. But overall, parents really struggle with the idea of blending families and how much time that takes and the importance of it. And so I have teens that are just sad because their family is broken up and there's like maybe a new family framework, and maybe that kid gets more attention than the other.
Wow.
So teens have a lot of different feelings about their parents. None of them feel like they can trust their parents. I will say that. Because and you know what? I laugh and I tell them all the time. I said, hey, that's part of the reason why you come here is because no matter what, your parent has to pay attention to safety first. And, you know, I'm here to listen to some of those other things that your parent may struggle to hear or will automatically see a safety issue in it and not really want to, like, hear it all. So most teens do feel that their parents, they can't trust them and that their parents won't understand. And that's partly the parents' fault, too.
When you say they don't trust their parents, can you say a little bit more about that? What do you mean when you say a teen cannot trust their parents?
Most of the time, teens cannot trust their parents with their emotions. And that's multi-layered, of course. Part of that is a teen could feel a parent is going to overreact based on what they say.
Okay.
Overreact and punish. The one thing I always tell my parents, and this is, I'm going to say it again, is you cannot tell your teenager that they can come to you with anything, but as soon as they come to you about one thing, you're ready to punish them or chastise them or you criticize them or, you know, that is not going to be helpful. That is going to ultimately shut the door indefinitely because they can't come to you with anything if this one thing is already having you up in smoke. So that's part of it. Part of it is that they can't trust their parents with their emotions. That's pretty much the bulk of it because teenagers have lots of emotions and they can't trust their parents with it. They can't trust that their parents will be able to put their own emotion to the side to try to support the teenager. They can't trust that their parents can trust them and what they need. So sometimes I tell parents, hey, maybe just check in with your teenager and ask them what is it that they need from you. I do this sometimes even in my, treatment. I'm like, what would you like from me in this moment? And I let them tell me, like, okay, just listen, or I need a suggestion, or can you talk to my parents? And I think I tell parents to do that too. I was like, when your teen is gonna come to you, count to 3, take some deep breaths in your mind before you respond, and just ask like, hey, what do you need from me in this moment? And that will really reinforce your relationship with your teen. It'll reinforce that you trust them and their decision making, which will then build their trust with you as the parent. And I think trust is a big deal because a lot of parents, I don't want to say that they overstep. I think they just go into parent mode. Like, I want to protect. I want to tell her the answer. I want to tell him the answer. They probably don't know what to do. And, that then will cut the teenager at their knees, because if they were going to make a good decision, you've already intercepted. And,
Sorry to cut you off, but I have a question for you. So, and it'll be one of my last questions for you. For parents that may be listening, they may be thinking to themselves, oh, well, I think me and my kid, we have a good relationship. What are some telltale signs that there's some trust issues or there's some barriers there between a parent and their teen that they can look forward to, realistically, this is what's happening here?
Okay. First sign is your teen does not talk to you at all. Now, I know a lot of parents would like to think that their teenager just is being a teen to an extent, because teenagers run their mouths, right? Teenagers have a lot to say. I've never been in a room of teenagers. I mean, I have, because sometimes in groups, teenagers don't trust the other teenagers, so they don't necessarily want to talk. But as soon as they get me for a second, it's just like, okay, mile a minute talking. So one of the very first things that you want to kind of consider is, are they talking to you? Are they immediately going for their headphones to not hear you talk?
Mm-hmm.
Um, are they, more are they really engaged in a lot of sports, right? Or different things? Because sometimes kids like to do stuff, but then sometimes they're filling up their schedule on purpose.
Mm.
I did that as a teenager. I filled up my schedule on purpose so that I could get home later. And
Mm.
when I got home later, it was just enough time for me to take a shower, do some homework, and go to sleep, which meant that I did not have to engage much at home.
Wow.
So those are some of the signs those I would say are the easiest signs or the quickest signs to really see. But
Okay.
again, in order to know the difference between like a quiet teen and a teen where you just really don't have a good relationship, as the parent, you really have to be intentional about spending time together. So that could look like telling your teen, hey, pick a movie, we're going to go catch a matinee. Or, hey, what's something you want to try? Or, just anything, going on Groupon and just trying to do something. Because I think that'll give you an opportunity to really see their interest. It'll give you an opportunity to see if this is just their baseline, they're always quiet, or if you as a parent really weren't setting up environments where they could kind of thrive with you and you were not in super parent mode.
Okay. Okay. So it seems like being intentional about your time. What if, and last question, if the problems just are to a point and you feel like even if I'm trying to be intentional about my time, I still can't get me and my teenager back on track, what should they do to help fix this?
Yeah, so I think I'm gonna comment on what they could do, of course, to kind of get their team back on track. So I'll start there. So definitely maybe getting some additional support. I tell people use your support system. So even if that means the team maybe goes to hang out with their godmother or their aunt, or you bring other people over, use the support because your support system could also help you determine what is going on and what's happening and how it can be back on track. Because it could be a number of things. Sometimes the teen is spending too much time with their parents, so they want time away. Sometimes
Mhm.
it's not enough time. So
Mhm.
using a support system is very helpful. Seeking therapy is also a really good option for if things just really aren't on the same page. And sometimes just simply asking the teenager, like, hey, I really don't feel like we have the best relationship. Just being honest, like, I don't really feel like we have the best relationship. So what do you think? Um, and then the reason I said that last was to segue into this is parents also have to identify what they see as a good relationship with their teenager.
Yeah. Yeah.
um, because some parents don't even care to have a good relationship with their teenager. And you hear a lot of parents say, I'm not trying to be her friend, I'm her parent. That is such a broken way of thinking about it.
Mm.
Because what actually separates friend from parent? Is it
Mm.
just being like mean? Is it discipline? Like, what is it, right? Because
Mhm.
in relationships, and I'm saying this to be funny, but I'm serious, when we're in romantic relationships, we always say, oh, you have to be that person's friend first. And it's like, well, why aren't we adopting this in parenting? This is going to be a lifelong relationship no matter what, yet I don't even want to invest any type of a friendship into it.
Right.
And
Right.
so for me, I don't like that. I don't like how we can be so loving and open and have all of these hopeful things about outside relationships, but we don't do the same with our children. We're not spanking our
Mhm.
coworkers. We're not cursing them out and using abusive.
Yeah.
I mean, some people, but
Yeah.
for the most part, we're not doing that. We're not
Mm.
shaming people like that every day, yet we will do it to our teens.
Wow.
Um,
Very true.
some people treat
Very true.
their friends better than they treat their children, and it's just like, how is this happening? So
Yes, that's definitely a hot topic there in terms of narcissistic parenting. That's one of the characteristics. But I'd like to give you a chance to offer the audience some resources on parenting or connecting with parents or teenagers and whatnot.
Yeah, so one of the books I wanted to just comment on today that I really enjoyed is called Parenting the Teen Brain,
Mm,
and it's Understanding a Work in Progress, and it's by
mm,
Cheryl Feinstein.
mhm.
And I really like this book because it's an easy read in terms of not a lot of jargon, like not a lot of that stuff, but she just really talks about how the teenage brain is formed and different things that parents can also do to help the teen thrive while they're growing and also
Mhm,
reduce the frustration from the parent. Because parents put a lot of
mhm,
frustration and stress on themselves because they just are reluctant to understand that a teenager needs to be parented differently or engaged with differently. Um,
mhm.
and so I would say this is probably the best resource that I have to offer in terms of parenting with teens.
Okay,
Um, it was just really good. Like I love this. I love this book.
that's
So
awesome. Awesome. And Janae, where can people find you if they are just blown away, like I am, by your interview and they want to connect with you more?
Thank you. So you guys can find me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at Teen Talk Therapy. And my website is www.teentherapytalks.com. And on my sites, I try to just share resources, different things happening with teens around the world, different ways that parents can be more supportive and just, see their inner selves to then provide their teenager with developing their best inner self.
Yeah,
Um, and yeah,
that's awesome. And do you have any sort of special projects or things like that that you want to discuss, books or anything like that, that people can find you on or support you on?
yeah, absolutely. So on my website, I have a really cool shop. I call it the Treasure Chest. It's like the therapy treasure chest. And you could I actually have social media contracts as a bundle on there. So
Oh,
if your teenager is struggling with navigating social media, or if any clinicians, anyone listening, I have pre-created contracts that a teen could sign and that you can also still customize with the expectations and different things. And those are helpful because it helps the team buy into what's going on as well as the parent. I have like an ultimate guide for parents. My book, Dear Teen Self, in the journal is also available, and those resources are for the teens specifically. Those are teen self-help books. So yeah, I have a few different things on me in the treasure chest. So.
that's awesome. Lots of talent there. Any tours or anything like that that you got? Because I know you do those kind of things, tours and
Yeah,
talks.
I do. I love doing those things. But no, not yet. Nothing scheduled. But I know I'm like I have to get back to planning. I love to be out and about and having parties. So, but I don't have
Right,
anything planned as of yet.
right.
Just working on probably the next book because kids keep asking me about it. They're like, "Are you writing another one?" I'm like, "Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes."
That's amazing. And I'm so appreciative of the work you do. And I'm so glad you were able to come on the show and talk about it. It blows me away with folks that work with teenagers and parents and really get in there and really look at some of those old beliefs. So thank you so much for coming on and talking about it and being who you are and doing what you do.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Okay, thank you so much for listening to that show. Wasn't that great? It took a different turn, completely unscripted than I thought it would. But yeah, I definitely agree with Janae on a lot of those points, and I definitely learned a lot from listening to her. So let me know, what did you think of the show? Please do reach out at datewithdarkness@gmail.com. Also in the show notes. Please also come on over and join our Facebook group, A Date with Darkness group, to get support from and give support to people that are recovering from hurtful and abusive relationships. As always, if you're not subscribed to the show, please do so. And if you feel like you could benefit or if you benefited from listening to the show, please do leave some feedback. Positive is preferred, on iTunes. Also, if you can't do iTunes, please come on and hit the inbox on Instagram. You can leave it on my Facebook page for A Date with Darkness. That's also great too. So, and also feel free to send me a message as well. So if you want to send a compliment through there, if you have questions or concerns, please do hit me up there. Love listening and chatting with you guys. And until next time, be well.